everybody, welcome to Bone2Pick. I am Michael Davis, and we are coming to you today from the venerable Sears Sound Studios in Midtown Manhattan. Absolutely thrilled to be in this incredible facility, and we're thrilled that it still exists with the way things are going with New York City studios. So, but even more so, I'm just really excited to be have the opportunity to sit down with our artist of the month, one of the most successful and in-demand independent jazz record producers, the great Matt Pierson. Matt has worn many hats throughout his illustrious career, originally as a musician and a trumpet player, becoming a record producer and then becoming a record executive. He is a graduate of the esteemed University of Miami Jazz program. He led Blue Note marketing and A&R departments, and then after that was hired by the legendary Mo Austin and became executive vice president and general manager of jazz at Warner Brothers. While he was there, he garnered over 40 Grammy nominations and countless #1 singles for his artists. His myriad producing credits, this could take up this entire interview to read them all, but just to give you a little nutshell: Brad Mehldau, Joshua Redman, Pat Metheny, Bob James, Kirk Whalum, Jane Monheit, just to name a few. He has produced a series of compilations and reissues, including classic packages from Duke Ellington, George Benson, Bill Evans, David Sanborn, Jaco Pastorius, and numerous others. In addition to his work as an independent producer, he is an A&R consultant for Sony Masterworks. And I have to say, we reminisced before we started today about the first time that I had the good fortune of meeting Matt. We did a 10-show, 2-week run with Julio Iglesias back in the late 80s at Radio City Music Hall. And that was the first time I had the pleasure of meeting Matt. He was in the trumpet section. I was in the trombone section. And so it's gone from there. I've had the great opportunity and pleasure to work for Matt many times over the years. It's always great when the phone rings and it's Matt, and he's got a new project on the line. So, Matt, thank you so much for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule. I'm really excited to hear your viewpoint on so many things we're going to talk about today. Why don't we first talk about aspects of your career, and then go all the way back, starting, you grew up in Michigan. Your dad, who sadly passed away this week, our condolences on that, but he was a legendary jazz pianist and jazz educator. Maybe talk about how you got into music and the trumpet and where things started out for you.
Yeah, I was the youngest of four. It was a very musical family. My my oldest sister runs the Flint Institute of Music, which is this incredible community music program up in Michigan. She was a violist and is in music. My other sister Melissa is the associate concertmaster for the Jacksonville Symphony. Okay. She's an incredible violinist. My brother Eric is a lawyer now, but he was a fantastic tuba player growing up. Cool. And so I was a trumpet player. I grew up. It was all assumed we were all going to play music because my dad was a music educator, and I was exposed to all kinds of music from when I was very young. I ended up on oboe in the beginning. For a year and a half I was playing oboe, and then a story that I've told, which is my dad had these 45s of some jazz stuff, like old Verve little LPs or MRC little LPs of Clifford Brown, and I found one that was Joy Spring, and I put it on my little record player, and I heard Clifford playing Joy Spring, and it completely changed my life. I was like, I got to be able to do that, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out how to make a reed. So that wasn't going to work. But my dad had a trumpet in the house because my dad had been a trumpet player. So I picked up the horn and tried to play along with Clifford. And of course, I got some notes out, and because I had from playing the oboe, I kind of had an airstream, and I was like, man, this is what I do. So when my dad got home, I'm like, Dad, come here, check this out. Listen to this. And as if he hadn't heard Joy Spring. And I said, I got to switch to trumpet. And he's like, oh, man. Because, my siblings were all violin, viola, and tuba. And I was going to play oboe, and I think he didn't want us to be jazz musicians. He had been through that and had friends, and it was like he wanted us to make a living. And there aren't a lot of great oboe players, so maybe he figured, but he couldn't really argue once he saw the passion I had for it. But I agree. He was like, but you're going to play legit. You can play jazz also, but you better learn to play legit. So I switched to trumpet, and I studied. It was kind of a jack of all trades. I played, in the Michigan Youth Symphony. I played principal trumpet in that group, and John Kelso was in the trumpet section. A lot of people I've run off over the years have been there, but I played that. I was becoming a lead player pretty early. I kind of had range thankfully from the beginning, and just all kinds of music. And then there were other things I did growing up, as an actor and a lot of other stuff that I thought I might want to do, but music was the calling. So I went to University of Michigan, University of Miami, jazz, studio music and jazz major. Was really inspired by Whit Seidner. Eventually got in the concert jazz band and had some great experience there. My goal was to be Jerry Hay. I was writing some charts. I would transcribe his arrangements. I was really into records. From very young, I was a record collector, and I would not just be into the jazz stuff and certain records and analyzing solos and transcribing, but the actual record making process always fascinated me. I was really into, from a very young age, into like Steely Dan and Weather Report and Earth, Wind and Fire and Al Jarreau records and Jerry's horn charts, and so I'd write that stuff out. And when I got to school, that was my goal, was because I knew I wasn't a real soloist. I never had the wherewithal and the dedication to put in the time to really become a great soloist. I could play in a big band chart or a Latin gig, but I wasn't going to be a competitive. But I could read real well, and I had range, and I could play a lot of things. But anyway, over time, I just expanded all of my horizons in music. Other than playing, once I finished school, I was in Miami a total of 8 years. I was playing, 6 nights a week in a top 40 band and playing a bunch of Latin gigs. But also I took a job at a record store, Peaches in Miami. Initially, I took the job because I found out that if you worked at the store, you could not only get promos for free, but you could buy stuff at cost. So I looked at it and I said, well, it's only going to pay $5 an hour or whatever the hell it was. Okay. But if I did the math, I was buying so many records because I had this huge record collection. I was like, every month I'm going to save another $200 or something. So I took the job so I could do that. But eventually I just got really into it, and I became the head buyer while still playing, so. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, obviously, but no. And then, and again, over time, once I became the head buyer, we were reporters to Billboard, and at that time, it's pre-SoundScan, and the way they came up with the Billboard chart was they would just call important stores and say, "What are your top 10 records?" And you tell them what your top 10 records are. Well, those top 10 records weren't the top 10 records.
They were your top 10 records.
They were the top 10 records that were suggested to me by several promotion people who were willing to send me a lot of product.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, Susan Levin from Blue Note, for example, would call, hey, we're working this record, this current George Adams and Don Pullen quartet record. How's it doing? I said, well, we sold one in the past 2 weeks. Anything you want, it's like they'd send me a bunch of Blue Note stuff, and Don Pullen all of a sudden sold 10 copies. So there was a lot of that, because and I'll admit that it's not a criminal act, but everyone was doing it. So, but there were certain people because of that. Brian Backus was at Verve Records, and he's still a dear friend. Brian was at Polygram, and several other people I'd gotten to know in the business, and Susan. So finally, I just said, there was a point where I'm on a gig. And I was sitting. It was a moment of realization. I was in a pit or playing behind Melissa Manchester or one of these Miami Beach gigs, and I was playing second trumpet. Sometimes I'd play lead, but sometimes I'd play second. But and I was on this gig, and I'm sitting next to this really great. I was 25 or whatever, and the guy next to me was 45 playing lead. And I'm like, what am I in this for? Maybe in 20 years I'll be one seat over. I didn't feel passionate about it. I loved playing, but I didn't want my business to be that. Yeah. And this is nothing against making a living as a working musician in that way. I just wanted to make a difference somehow. I wanted, and I was really into records. So I decided I wanted to get in the record business, and I moved to New York.
That's amazing. I mean, I hadn't heard that aspect of your early career, but boy, the combination of being at University of Miami and learning on that aspect, but then also obviously what you learned at the record store, it's perfect for a perfect setup for what was to come in New York.
A couple other things I was doing, like I was working part-time for BMI as a logger. I got to know a guy at BMI, and what the logger does is they'd send you to restaurants and clubs and stuff that were not paying their BMI licensing fee. And I would go in and log what songs I heard, because I knew a lot of music. So I'd write down the songs, and if I didn't, I'd make some notes to remind myself to look it up later. Then I'd hand in this logging report, and then BMI would go after them and threaten a lawsuit if they didn't agree to pay their BMI fee. So I was doing that once or twice a week.
Wow.
When I had a free few hours, I'd go to some restaurant in Miami Beach and act like I could, and they'd pay for my meal. I could get expenses. So I'd eat a free meal, write down some tunes, and hand in a report. And I did a radio show at college and stuff. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to know all parts of the business. I wanted to, if I was, especially near the end, I wanted to get as much of a varied experience. I'd played in recording studios. So that when I got my foot in the business after moving to New York, I kind of had a well-rounded understanding of all aspects of it. And so
when you talk about, clearly you've made such a huge impact on the jazz world and the record business. Let's talk about the first big thing, which seems to me would be your time at Blue Note and your relationship with Bruce Lundvall and him mentoring you, and the impact seems like it started there, and maybe share your thoughts and memories about that
Bruce,
time.
who passed a few years back, when I moved to New York and got in the business, the first job was, and I moved up without a job. I moved up, all I knew was I had a job in the cassette department of Tower Records. And I had about $1,500 to my name, and I drove my truck up. But Susan had led me to believe there was a shot in an assistant job at Blue Note to be her assistant. It was totally entry-level promotion assistant job. But I moved up, and then 6 weeks after I started working at Tower, I got the job at Blue Note. This is April Fool's Day, April 1st, 1988. And part of it was I had met Bruce and Michael Kaskuna.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember when I was a kid as a trumpet player, my dad, every year we'd get records for Christmas. And my dad got me this record called The Beginning and the End, which is this Clifford Brown record that's his earliest sessions and then his last gig. In reality, it ends up that it wasn't really his last gig, but that's how they sold it. And they were told this tape was from his last gig before he got in the car and died. Mm-hmm. But anyway, on the back of it, the liner notes were by Bruce Lundvall. And I still remember seeing it. And at that time, Bruce was the head of marketing at Columbia Records. And I still remember reading this and going, Bruce Lundvall, VP marketing, Columbia. And remembering seeing that and thinking, God, isn't this cool? This marketing guy is into jazz. Then eventually, once I got into records and all that, I knew who Bruce was and I knew what he had done in reactivating Blue Note. So my dream was to go work at Blue Note. Mm-hmm. The two guys I really wanted to know and work with were Bruce and Mo Austin, because after knowing enough about the music business, stepping into it, it was like those were my two pillars of brilliance within the music industry. It's what Bruce was and what Blue Note was, and it's what Mo had created, the culture he had created at Warner Brothers Records. I wanted to have that kind of experience. So anyway, I started work with Bruce. He, I could talk forever about it.
Sure.
Part of that, I don't know how much editing you can do with this, but he, right off, he was this incredibly huge character, an incredibly loving, beautiful, warm guy. Never known anyone with so much passion for jazz, so much positivity. No one had ever had anything negative to say about the guy. Returned every phone call. Really was in it for the music. And, there were drawbacks to that because I ended up being his number two guy. So artists would have a meeting with Bruce, and of course Bruce would say yes. He was Mr. Yes, they called him. And then they'd come down the hall if I wasn't able to usurp him and get into that meeting and be there to kind of, temper it. They'd come down the hall. Hey, I met with Bruce. He said I could get an ad in Downbeat Magazine, full page ad in Downbeat Magazine, and I'd be the one that'd say, well, really listen. What he meant was, if within the context of our marketing budget, that makes sense for us. But listen, here's the story. If we only do this group ad where you're a part of it, we'll have enough money left to take you to this other higher and independent promotion. So it was a really great lesson in that way. But, one of the funniest things that happened with Bruce was I had been working there. I sat in the desk in the hallway out in front of Susan's office. And Bruce would always walk by in the morning. Hello, lad, how are you? And this one, I'd been there maybe a week and a half. And he came down the hall and goes, how are you, lad? Let's go to lunch. No, he said, I want to show you something. Come on. And I said, oh, shit. And I said, Susan, Bruce is, So he took me downstairs. And at that time, our office was on 710 or whatever. It was on 7th Avenue and 52nd Street. And we walked out of the office, and he's walking me around the corner, and he's just talking to me about, how's it going? How's Susan treating you? And we turn around the corner, and we get to Flash Dancers. And he turns down and walks in. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? My new boss, Bruce Lundvall, this legend, is going to take me to a strip club at 1 o'clock. this is crazy. And we go down into the strip club, and I'm going, what the fuck is going on? I hope I have some singles. And he, and as we walk down in there's like a couple of random businessmen and a couple of girls and stuff. And he goes, "You see that right over there?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, that was the Peanut Gallery. That's we'd give for $1, be able to sit up there and have a beer. It was Birdland.
Yeah.
And I don't know if everyone knows that, but it's the exact space that was Birdland. And I didn't know that. And then then we went and had lunch, and he told me all these incredible stories about coming in on the bus with his friends from Jersey and hearing Bird and Miles, Coltrane, and all of this. He's just an incredible guy. And what I learned more than anything, I learned a lot from this guy, but mainly it really had to do with true passion for an artist and what makes an artist an individual. Part of it's what I kind of sensed and knew from the music I loved, but he really put it into practice. And understanding the balance between art and commerce. He found a way to survive within that company with the longest list of bosses you'd ever see. That company changed hands so many times while he was at Blue Note. They moved it from company to company. The way I got the job was originally it was part of EMI, and then it moved over to Capitol Records, and that's the point I was able to come in. So it was no longer under EMI, it was under Capitol. But then after I left, then it switched around to different bosses and different people would come in and they consolidate departments. And through all of that, Bruce survived because he always had this sense of how to balance, catalog billing, how do you continue to re-release the right kind of material at the right pace, while you take chances on certain frontline artists, balancing the artists that you know they aren't going to make money, but going to continue to give you credibility and be a talent magnet for you. Putting out solo piano recordings of McCoy Tyner, while you also sign and develop, Gonzalo Rubalcaba and Jackie Terrison, like all these different musicians. So a really great balance of that, and then understanding the pop side. So whether it was signing Dave Koz or Rochelle Farrell and Diane Reeves, his understanding of artists that cross boundaries and how do you work with them and find a way to give them the opportunity to realize all of their vision, not put them in a pigeonhole. I think it's one of the challenges that in time looking back with those two artists, with Rochelle Farrell and Diane Reeves, in a way, and Bobby McFerrin, the diversity of their career is the result of Bruce allowing them to spread their wings and do their thing. Another executive would say, no, listen, you're going to be this. You're the next Whitney Houston. No, it was, we're going to let the music dictate. And in some cases, that doesn't always work. There are artists, when given that much freedom, it doesn't get the best possible results, either creatively or from a business standpoint. But it's better to have that risk than to force people to do something that isn't what they believe. So I learned a lot of that from him. The other thing is that I learned so much from Michael Cascuna. Michael's a genius. This guy, and he's now been running Mosaic Records forever, but he had been working with Blue Note the entire time. And not only did I learn a lot from him about catalog, because I've done a lot of reissues and compilations and liner notes and stuff like that as well, but the record production piece. And again, he and I work differently in terms of how we produce, but the couple of things that I did learn from him about documenting the moment, about setting the scene, about comfort in the studio for artists and a lot of that was really, really helpful. So it was an incredible experience. I mean, it was just less than 4 years of my life, but over time, I'd still stay in touch with Bruce and see him. I'm still see Michael now and then. Bruce was a true mentor, and this guy was so supportive and so positive, and the couple of times that I did something wrong, he took care of me. Yeah. He was like, you've disappointed me. And it was like my dad, saying it. So
that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing all that. Let's talk about in 1992, you moved over to Warner Brothers and made a huge impact on the scene there. So maybe talk about, I didn't know that you had been hired by Mo Austin, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. But
the way it went down, I had gotten to know Tommy LaPuma and Russ Titleman. I knew Tommy because at one point, Rick Margitza.
Sure.
Rick was a student of my father's, and I'd known Rick forever. We were roommates for a while in college as well. And he was, he's a genius musician, but at that point I was like, this is a guy I'd love to work with. So I was signing him to Blue Note when I was at Blue Note after knowing for so long. And somehow I got wind that Miles needed a sax. I wanted Miles to hear Rick. I think that we had heard that Kenny was leaving the band, Kenny Garrett. And I said to Michael, what should I do? He said, well, call Tommy. So I called Tommy LaPuma. He said, Michael Cascuna gave me your number. I got the sax player you should hear. And I sent Rick's tape to Tommy. And then Tommy called me back and he said, man, this guy's unbelievable. And I've just played Miles the tape over the phone and he loves him. Can Rick be over to the Esses house tomorrow to meet Miles? I'm like, wow. Shit, yeah. You know? So that happened, and then he got hired. He got called to play with Miles.
Right.
And what happened was he got to the first gig and Kenny hadn't left the band. And they played like one gig, and afterwards it was like, look, this isn't going to work. Sorry, Rick. But then several months later, he called him again to come on when Kenny had left the band. But at that point, I met Tommy, and then Tommy called me. He goes, let's get together. And we met, and Tommy wanted to hire me to be his assistant because he saw that I was a musician and that I knew a lot about different parts of the business, and I knew a lot of young musicians. And I had a meeting with him. He set up a meeting with Mo and Lenny Warrenker, the president of Warner, trying to hire me, and they didn't let him hire me. So I stayed at Blue Note, and I got to know Russ Titleman, who's a fantastic producer,
sure.
Just as friends. And so anyway, what happened was I was talking to Russ one day, and I said, so what's going on? Because Tommy left Warner, and he was like, they didn't do what he wanted for the contract he wanted. His contract was up, and they gave him like a $10,000 raise, and he had made millions of dollars for the company. So he decided to leave to go to Elektra to work with his old friend Bob Krasnow. And I said to Tommy, to Titleman, what's going on over there on the A&R front? He goes, well, I don't know. Maybe no one's doing it. You want me to check? And he called, I think he called Lenny, and then and said, yeah, they're interested. Come out. They'll fly you out for an interview. So I was going out for an interview. Night before the interview, I called Tommy. And I said, so Tommy, listen, I'm on my way out to meet with Mo and Lenny about the A&R gig there. He goes, oh my God, I'm calling Mo. So then he called Mo that night and put in a word for me.
Wow.
So,
that's cool.
So yeah, I went out, this incredible thing. I'm like sitting there in Mo Osman's office, and Mo, for anyone who doesn't know that much about him, I mean, he started as the accountant. He was at Verve Records, and he was the accountant at Verve. And then when Sinatra started Reprise, he went and was like Reprise's accountant, GM type person, running Reprise with Sinatra. And then he ended up running all of Warner Reprise. But unbelievably brilliant, legendary music guy. Not only was he it wasn't that he had a great ear for music, he had an incredible ear for incredible sense of executive talent. He knew what he didn't know, and he knew how to put people around him who knew what filled in those blanks.
Gaps, yeah.
And his overall sense of the business was unbelievably unmatched. And this is a guy who signed Hendrix.
Yeah.
And when he signed Hendrix, he gave Hendrix the right to his masters. And that's the way he got him.
Yeah.
And his feeling was, this guy's not going to go anywhere once he's here. You know, once we have to have faith in who we are and what we are. I mean, they signed Prince and stuck with Prince without any hits. So there was all this stuff about it. So, but when I had the interview, I was able to sit with Mo for a couple hours and hear all these great stories about Sinatra and Verve. And
yeah,
everything.
I can only imagine.
So
when you look back on, I mean, you did so many projects at Warner. And not to single anything out, because I'm sure that many of them have very special, specific things to you. But what are some of your ones that jump out at you that you remember in specific kind of ways?
I mean, I was there for 12, 13 years,
yeah.
and you know, I think that, you know, when I got there, the only jazz artist on the roster, straight ahead jazz artist on the roster, was Mark Whitfield. The rest of the roster was all people who Tommy had signed and had a lot of commercial success. So it was. George Benson, Michael Franks, Earl Klugh, Joe Sample, Foreplay had made their first record. So it was a lot of commercial jazz. And all of those artists were starting to sell less. So I had to kind of balance out the roster. So part of the straight ahead side, like I immediately signed Kenny Garrett because he was available, and I always felt Kenny was the player of his generation. And if we could make the right records, we could do really well with him. And then developed very careful set of straight ahead jazz artists. So, you know, it was Kenny and then I signed Joshua Redman, which was an incredible experience. I went and saw him at the Monk competition, and after the semifinals, he just blew me away. And that night I said, I want to sign you to Warner. And he's like, what if I don't win tomorrow? I'm like, I don't care. You know? Although we all knew he was going to win. But, you know, signing Josh and working with Josh was a huge
fortuitous
experience.
moment there.
And that band the Mood Swing Band, working with, that band with Brad and McBride and Blade. That recording, which I think has really stood up, was so important to me, and being involved in that. So all the stuff that I worked with Josh was really important. The Brad thing really stands out because when I first heard Brad, it was right at a time when everyone was fighting over signing another piano player. And it was the hot guy. And I was interested in him, but then I went and I went to a gig and heard Brad. I had heard Brad with Christopher Holiday once, and he blew me away. But I hadn't stayed in touch with him, and then I went and heard one of his first gigs playing with Josh, and I had never heard anything like this. In a selfish way, he was everything I personally wanted to hear. Okay? Like this perfect combination of intellect and groove. It just had it all. And it was so effortless the way he played. And it was Wynton Kelly meets Herbie Hancock. And I'm like, this is my guy. He's doing everything I want to hear. And so I passed on this other guy, and I went for Brad, who no one else really knew about.
Wow.
The musicians knew about him in New York. He was starting to make a name, and he had just gotten in Josh's band. So I started working with Brad, and it was a challenge over time. But what I felt was, especially, we did the first record that was half with the Mood Swing rhythm section, that was with McBride and Blade, and half with Brad's current band he had been working with, which was Larry Grenadier and Jorge Rossi. And when I worked with that trio, as great as the Mood Swing rhythm section was, that trio had a real sound. And Brad was really doing something special with that trio. So I proposed to him I said, I want to do a series of trio records. I want to just record you guys as much as we can. I want you to tour your asses off. I want to do studio records and live records and put out a series, and we're going to call it The Art of the Trio. And as lofty as that title is or whatever, and he went for it, thankfully. And I felt strongly enough about it that we could make that statement and create a series of recordings. And I think they've really stood up.
No doubt.
And he's a guy that he's just an unbelievably talented visionary artist. And it was very complicated at times, but one of the sweetest guys in the world, and just an immense talent. So to me, in terms of signings, he's probably one that really stands out, but it's all special for different reasons. I mean, making records with Larry Goldings, the 3 Mark Turner records I was able to make. I almost never made fewer than 3 records with an artist. I'd find a way to get the 3rd record out. So that with Goldings, even though we were having challenges selling Larry, we made the first 2 organ trio records. I was like, I want to make one more record. And I said, what do you want to do? And we did a piano trio record with Grenadier and Paul Motion with Larry. And I'm really proud of that record. Mark Turner, we did 3 Mark Turner records that are still, I'm very, very proud of. And musicians bring those up to me all the time. So even though, it's not like you view Mark Turner on a major label, was that necessarily what needed to happen at that time? For me, I heard the guy, I'm like, we got to do this. So, and then signing Pat Metheny was something I'm extremely proud of. And Pat, to this day, is a very dear friend. And he exemplified to me, and still exemplifies everything that can be great about an artist. The balance of incredibly deep talent, depth of artistic integrity, incredible diversity, yet infinitely accessible and uncompromising. Like that balance that he's had over his career, and how brilliant he's positioned himself, and how brilliantly he's positioned himself, is just, something that I use every time I talk to an artist that has any variety of what they do. It's like, you got to find a way to do what Pat did. Not in the way he did it, but look at that career and how he was able to create the group, and then do these trio recordings and solo guitar recordings and soundtracks. But no matter what, he could always feed the Pat Metheny group. And that would be, he'd tour, he'd get out there, he'd bring in all these fans, and when he did another project, people knew, I might like this. I'm going to like this. I might not love it, but I'm going to check it out. So he could do Song X or Rejoicing or any number of other things. So that's the thing. But to me, he's, without question, the most important artist in jazz of our lifetime, for a variety of reasons. So, the chance to work with him and to sign him to Warner, he had been on Geffen, was really, really important.
Which records did you guys do with the group?
With the group? Well, the first we did Imaginary Day, which was
right,
and then we did the way up.
You did the way up. That's one of my favorite records.
And we also did Pat's the trio records with so we did Trio 99 100 and the Trio live record. We did One Quiet Night solo guitar record. We put out soundtrack project. It was a series of things. And that deal, after I left Warner, a few years after that, his deal, he's still on Nonesuch.
Right.
See, after he left Warner, Nonesuch was able to pick up any of the contracts that were left when I left, when they closed the jazz division at Warner. And so they picked up Brad and Josh and Pat. So they're all still on Nonesuch. And those deals are, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I don't know the legal part of it. I think probably they're all still the deals that we signed, or extensions of the deals.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great work. The way up. I mean, I still probably, if I had to pick one record, that's
I'm like, Imaginary Day is one that just really got me. I mean, but they all do in different ways.
Exactly.
I mean, I had known Pat before. Like, we had worked together on Joshua's record, on Kenny Garrett's record, and on I did Milton Nascimento's Angelus record. It was just early in my production. I mean, it might be the 15th record I produced or something, but we did a session with Herbie, Ron Carter, Jack DeJohnette, and Metheny with Milton Nascimento.
Wow.
But yeah, it was it in this room?
Nice booking.
I think it was in this room, I think. No, it was Avatar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was very funny. It was a wild experience because
I can only imagine.
We did the tune, God, I can't believe I've forgotten. I'll remember in a second. Really great Milton tune, Samba. And we did a take, and it was all over. It was fantastic, but it was Herbie and Pat and Jack and all of this. And we came in, we're listening to playback, and I'm all fucking nervous because I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing with all these people? People I had met over, here and there, but I had never been a producer on a record with these guys on a session. Sure. And we listened to the first take, and at one point during the take, Ron stopped playing for like 3 bars and then started playing again. And right around that point, I think Pat said, what's going on? And we stopped listening, and Ron's like, man, Herbie, you're playing all this stuff over here, and Pat, you're doing all this, and Jack's all of this. I mean, if someone would just play a fucking whole note. And Herbie says, I'll play a whole note. I won't play it on one. And there was this tension that was obviously kind of existed between Ron and Herbie, and I'm this kid producer sitting here in this situation with them. And Pat said, what do you think? To me. And I'm like, it's like my moment. What the hell am I going to say? And I just kind of said, I think we should do another one, and there's so much music going on. It's all really beautiful. Let's just make sure we leave space for each other. I think it's something like that. I said, like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And they went out, and we got a great take.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's all it was? That's all it took? But
you certainly have a knack for it, and it's more than just that one statement. That's for sure. And I've been on the receiving end of your good direction. So you've done it time and time again over the course of your career. We could talk about all the projects you've done and do a whole interview just on that. But I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to shift gears right now and just want to ask you a simple question, but it's going to have a very complicated answer, I think. We hear about how everything is so different now with YouTube, with downloads, with all the aspects that have caused the record industry to change. As clearly as you can put it, because you have insight that none of us have access to, and experiences that none of us have access to. How do you feel the record business has changed over the last 20 years, and how has jazz changed in terms of a product that's marketed in the last couple of decades?
Did you say I have an option to not answer this question? Was that it?
No,
Can I check that box?
That was not on the.
Well, it's I guess the way I'll answer that, which is if we're talking specifically about jazz, we have to remember that we can't do that. Okay, if we're going to do that, not only will we get depressed, but we're going to lose sight of where music in general has been going our entire lives. There has been so much cross-pollination creatively and with audiences and all of that, that the minute we think about just one sector, one genre, we lose sight of our potential audience, and we lose sight of what's been happening in other genres that have strongly affects our, not just positive opportunities that we might have from learning from others, but how it affects us negatively. We need to kind of view ourselves as being part of an overall industry. And as much as possible, look for positive opportunities and not mire ourselves down in the potential ways that are going to depress us and be negative, because that's really easy, and that can be, it's a very dark time in many, many ways. I think that first of all, what's most important is, through all of it, is the balance of art and commerce, and having an understanding of what that is. And all that basically means to me is, the art piece has to be about personal connection with a listener. No matter who you are, no matter what kind of music you're making, your goal has to be to tell a story and connect emotionally with a listener to a degree that they're engaged enough to give you their money. And that's where the commerce part comes in. How they're going to give you the money is just about what revenue streams exist and how are you going to, get that payment for that emotional connection. But if it starts with the emotional connection, it starts with the creation of the music itself. It starts with who are the artists that are going to be able to do this, and are the artists giving the opportunities to realize their vision, yet do it in a way that, again, puts front and center what's going to be most connective, then the music can survive. So it's about what music is being created, what's being documented, what's being positioned, and then is there a full understanding within the team of people working with that artist in terms of utilizing in all of the different revenue streams that exist. The problem that is there right now is that connection is extremely difficult to make. Record companies are very, very backwards in terms, or at least I'll say extremely slow to adapt to the new business models, because they're a bunch of people sitting in an office, walking in every day and deciding, what can I do today? Whereas every split second, things are changing and moving and all of that. And there are so many options of how people get exposed to music, and so many different ways for that to happen, for that connection to happen, that when the business has gotten smaller, there are fewer people to try to make those connections. So in the past, when you had a staff of 10 people, 12 people, and one person was the radio promotion, the jazz promotion person, and their job every day was to take all the records that the company put out and get this format of stations that was 45 important stations that you would call every week and say, this week we're pushing this track. And then you'd go home and have dinner, and you'd go the next day and say, I'm going to call these stations today. That is nothing like what it is today. It's very, very different. And each person that works at an effective record company is going to have to be working with this different kind of organism of what their area of expertise might be and how they're going to connect those dots. So it's extremely complicated and challenging. And especially when you're working with music that has a perception of being an intellectual product, an intellectually stimulating product, then you have a problem. And the problem I have with that is the reason I'm in jazz or jazz adjacent music or any singer-songwriters and other kinds of music I work with. The reason I'm in it because I'm emotionally connected and spiritually moved. And that's why, if an artist has that, they can make the connection. The perception of jazz now, though, is that that's not what it is. Other than people listening to Kind of Blue or Diana Krall or, Bill Evans Trio or whatever they might happen upon, the perception is this is intellectual music. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, people, it's exciting. I've only heard part of one track so far, this new Coltrane stuff. It's Discovered Recording. But I'm like, when you think about Coltrane, as students of music, and when we studied music, it was like tertiary harmony. It was giant steps. It was, my God, we have to learn to blow over this. But the reality is, the reason Coltrane was important and had the line at the half note around the block going to see the quartet was because of the emotional and spiritual impact of his playing in that band. That's what was monetized, not just, that's what was, it wasn't just the financial piece of it. It was an emotional connection that people had with it, that they wanted to pay for that experience. And that's why the catalog sells what it does. So I have a faith in the idea of having an industry that leads with its heart and with emotion, leads with artists that have that to offer. And hopefully, if we know enough about the changing revenue streams and all that, we're able to actually still have a business. From a practical standpoint, I mean, I'm not as up on everything as I need to be. I still have sitting on my laptop all the information about the new legislation in Washington that's hopefully going to be going into effect, to understand how the revenue is going to be driven and how it can positively affect songwriters and those who own masters and producers. But good things are happening in Washington. But the fact still remains that music has been completely devalued. We can all look at how it happened and analyze it and all that. I have a very strong feeling because I was there. It was very obvious to me that the record company shot itself in the foot. Record business shot itself in the foot by saying, we're going to keep selling these CDs for $16 to $18 with one good song on it, and we're not going to sell singles. You know, and the consumer knows that they are getting the song isn't worth that much to them. One or two songs on a record. So people weren't making good records. They weren't albums that gave them, you know. And at that point, everyone expected 70 minutes of music, which is fucking absurd anyway. Like once you found out you could put 76 minutes on a CD or whatever, now you're going to put all those tunes on a record. Why are you doing that?
Right.
Our favorite records are like 35 minutes long. But anyway, the consumer though would say, oh, 70 minutes of music, and they listen to it once and they go, well, I like that one song, but, and the business, though they tried to put out CD singles and tried to do all this stuff, the singles format went away. And at that time, P2P popped up. So you had Napster and other P2P services where the consumer could get away with stealing tracks. And there, you know, and so then, you know, all of a sudden everyone's freaking out. They're stealing our music through P2P. And where the business fucked up is they, instead of saying, my God, people love our music so much that they're willing to steal it. Who are these people and how can we sell them something? What product can we now sell our fan base? Because they're getting it for free now. No, they turned around and sued the people, including grandmothers whose grandson was downloading tracks in her basement and all that bullshit. Like, that's smart business.
Yeah.
These are the people that want your product. So that then created a vacuum where people started just feeling comfortable stealing music. And even though it was illegal, the fact is that music was then devalued. And then Apple, of course, finally comes up with the music store and sells singles, it was too late. Now, of course, it's sold and downloads have sold, and there's been an audience for that. But by and large, the community of people who we had that we wanted to actually sell our product to, was the ownership of music no longer had value. When you then dovetail that into streaming platforms where you can listen to any song at any time on any device for either free or hopefully you're paying $10 a month, that means that all these people that were spending all this money for music no longer are spending that. They might be spending $10 a month. So we have to find a way to create a model that generates enough revenue to pay the bills. And to me, it's a few things, but the main issues have to do with increasing the number of people on the streaming platforms. In jazz in particular, it's about understanding that we have a huge divide right now. You have a jazz audience that is not streaming, so therefore what should be your core fan base that is not huge, but it's enough, they're not even paying the $10 a month. They're just sitting at home with the CDs they own or the downloads they own and listening to what they already own. And if there's a new artist that they like or want to check out, they might go on YouTube or go on the free service, the free version of Spotify. They're not paying $10 a month. And it's like this weird dichotomy where these people are thinking, oh, well, jazz is worth so much more than that. I love jazz. And if I feed the man, if I pay $10 to, you know, Daniel Ek, that all of a sudden I'm devaluing the music. When the reality is all those people need to give their $10 a month and use that service and listen to that service. But the bigger problem is the people that are actually on these platforms are not listening to jazz. So when you've got a business that the jazz market has been 1.5 to 2% of the overall record business for several years now. But it's only 0.6 or 0.6 to 0.8% of the streaming market. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas jazz, when you listen to what this music is and what much of these artists are doing, it should travel really well. It should sell really well on streaming platforms. This is really strong lifestyle music. It's great for many different parts of your life. It's some of these playlists could be terrific in terms of getting the music out there. The playlists that do really well in the jazz world, like on Spotify, you know, coffee table jazz and late night jazz and the jazz vocal playlist, these do really, really well. So it's about finding a way to connect that. Mm-hmm. It's getting the streaming platforms to emphasize jazz and position jazz and giving them product that they can stream. Mm-hmm. So many of the things I'm doing now, things I'm doing with Sony and elsewhere, are to try to create content that can get placed on these playlists. The thing about this that I want to make sure I say is that what's beautiful about it, we have to be optimistic and we have to accentuate the positive. As Johnny Mercer said, you've got to say, now wait a minute here. Back in the 50s and 60s, Blue Note Records, where I had my first job in the business, and doing all these reissues, as I did that and I studied the Blue Note catalog, there were years that Hank Mobley or Lee Morgan would put out 6 records in a year. They'd put out 5 or 6 of their own records, then they'd be on 4 Art Blakey records and 3 of the other guys' records. I mean, it was insane, like how much music was being created. Yeah. And if you were a fan of Lee Morgan, you'd buy 10 records a year. You'd get it all. At the same time, Andy Williams and Nat Cole and Johnny Mathis and Barbra Streisand and Sinatra and all these people were making 5 and 6 records a year. And on top of that, everyone was making singles. You'd put out singles, mm-hmm. and if your single did well, you'd do another single, and maybe if the label he had 2 or 3 hit singles, says, "Oh, now we got to make a record. Let's book a session and finish a record, put out a record." Like there was a infrastructure to put all this music out. But the way people created music was freewheeling. If you were a creative artist, you could continue. You'd go in the studio once a month. Well, over the past 20 years, we've been in a world where you had an album cycle that was like a year and a half as a jazz artist. So you're Kenny Garrett, okay? You know, like this is what I tried to do with Brad. We put out 2 records a year, and it's like that was a revolution, you know? It's like Brad Mehldau should be putting the equivalent of like 5 records a year.
Right.
But you couldn't because the infrastructure didn't exist and the business was on these album cycles. Now, thanks to streaming, if you find a way to finance the recording piece of it, the structure is in place to release a lot of content. Now, if you're smart about what the content is, and if you pattern the release of that content to be able to drive these revenue streams, it can be a massive business because you're dealing in volume, and in volume to a fan base that eats it up. So you're going to feed people who are you're leaving money on the table. You're leaving opportunity for connection with music on the table because all these people that, if you're, you know, Brad Mehldau, that would buy 10 Brad Mehldau records in a year if they were out, he can put all that music up and stream it. And if you find a way to pace it and put it out and market it, try to segment out which audience might want some of it and market this part to this and this part to these people and this part to these people, all of a sudden the artist can realize all of this vision and all this music that's in them and continue to feed these different fires that are within them, yet have a business that doesn't conflict. Mm-hmm. So the opportunities, ranting on about it, but the opportunities that exist are fantastic.
Yeah.
It's figuring out how to squeeze money out of it. And to me, it's really about market penetration of the streaming platforms. So it's getting every single person I personally think it's really going to be when we finally get to the time that music services are folded into either our phone bill or our cable bill. If that can happen and it's probably $5 is my personal opinion. It's not $10. I think $10 to people now, music's devalued to a point where I don't think it's worth $10 a month to them. But if every single person in the world, everyone in a reasonable country that has the money could cough up $5 a month or the equivalent, or in some countries it's $2 a month. That's where it is now. Like a subscription to Spotify in Thailand and places is less. If that kind of market penetration exists, our business will generate 2 or 3 times as much revenue as it did at its height, because it's that much money coming in. And then all of a sudden you've got something. The other things that are exciting that are happening, obviously artists need to tour, and touring is a challenge. The reason touring revenue isn't what it was, I think, and I think people have challenges, is they don't have the infrastructure of the record labels supporting their music and their touring. So it's about figuring out that piece in some way. Licensing exists, but it's very challenging to get those slots to license your music, and it doesn't pay as much as it did. The other piece that's really a big revenue stream, I think, that still hasn't worked itself out because the platforms haven't, been as efficient or effective as they could be, is the direct-to-fan model, which I've been a big fan of Pledge Music, for example, and did some consulting with them, and really believe in that model. Whereas if you find your super fans, and you could generate an average of 60, 70, 80 bucks of a project from those, because they're buying products that are more engaging and pulling them more into the process. Those people, not only you not leaving the money on the table that could be coming in, but you then have your own virtual marketing team of people that are spreading the word about your music.
Sure.
So that's a model that needs to still work out some kinks, but I think it's a huge model.
Do you feel like, and thank you for all that, that's a tremendous insight you just shared with us, in terms of a young artist, and we have a lot of young viewers that watch the series. But there's so many. There are, as there always has been, like just streams of really talented young musicians coming up. What specifically would be their path? So you think the crowdfunding, however you go down that road, is a very viable source? Do you feel, in terms of self-releasing CDs, it seems like that's become like almost a necessary launching point? What's your feelings on that for really young, starting out professional, wanting to be professional jazz artists?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that being an older guy, having been in the business a lot of years now, I mean, nothing's, in a way, everything's changed, but in fact, really nothing really has. Philosophically. I mean, it's all about building a fan base and generating revenue with that fan base. It's about who can you reach and who can you get on your side, and who's going to be willing to give you money to do what you do for a living. And there are more ways to find those fans now than there ever were. The internet's like a really cool thing.
No
this
doubt.
This is pretty fucking cool. I can pick up my phone, and I did one of the funniest things ever. Last night, Mark Maron was on Colbert, and he did this whole thing about about what happens when you're like, what your life used to be like, and it was about oh shit! It was about peanut butter, and you're sitting there and go, "What's that guy's name who like invented peanut butter and stuff? He's got 3 names. What's his name? Shit, what's his name? Oh well." And then you go on in your life and stuff, and halfway through the day you're still going, "Who the fuck was that guy?" And you pick up the phone and you call a friend, and you get their answering machine that's in their house. Say, "Hey, that guy, the peanut butter guy. What's his name? 3 names. Call me back." Okay, and you hang up. And you go through your whole day, and you're like, "Who the fuck's that peanut butter guy?" And finally, you get home that night, and your light is beeping on your machine, and you press the button, and it's your friend. "Hey, it's George Washington Carver. Okay, man, call me back." It's like, you went through all that, and it's like right now. Boom.
Yeah.
Wikipedia, peanut butter, George Washington Carver. Here's his whole biography, and here's a film documentary about it. It's like, shit.
Hey.
It's really cool.
Oh, it's amazing.
And when you look at exposure of music and reaching fans and building an infrastructure for it, for yourself, it's extraordinary what can be done.
Sure.
So I absolutely think that it's really, this is one of those things when I've taught music business a few times at NYU and New School and some stuff at Miami. What I always emphasize, and one of the frustrations I still have about music education now, is there is not enough emphasis. Parents are sending their kids to school and writing these big checks, or people have donated all this money to school and it's going on scholarship. And the focus isn't enough on, you're getting a degree, sure, but who gives a shit about your degree? You're leaving that school knowing how you're going to make a living in a job. When you go to law school, you leave law school knowing you're going to make a living at the job. Young musicians aren't learning that. So not enough people are even, freelance musicians. The number of times I meet with an artist I'm going to produce, And I always say to them, you're going to sign a contract with me as a producer. Right now, I want you to go out and buy Don Passman's book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business. And I want you to buy that book, and I want you to read that book. And it's got, you don't need to read every word of it. Some areas it goes into more detail than you need, just get the fine points. But there's a chapter in there about producing and producer contracts and what you need to know. Go do that, because I want you to trust me. Okay? And the number of artists that actually, I have that book, they're so few. It's like, how the fuck do you not have the Bible of your business that's going to tell you how to make money in your career of choice? That's disgusting. And it's disgusting that some people go to a conservatory kind of atmosphere and a music school where there might, in some cases there's one music business class, one 3-credit class, and they go and they get the Laskey book and they learn about copyright and the basics of the business. But they don't learn entrepreneurship, or they don't learn about, how is it that I'm going to make money when I leave this room? What if I play these auditions and I don't get the job in the big symphony, and I end up living in, Grand Rapids, Michigan, making a living as a working musician? How am I going to make a living? Well, if you don't know enough about, if you're a songwriter and you don't know what can happen about your songwriting, if you're in the Broadway musical theater world and you don't know enough about guilds and about unions and about, the grand rights and all these things, if you don't know enough about the revenue that's there to be had, if you don't know about arts management, your opportunity won't exist. That you say, oh, well, shit, I didn't get the job in Broadway, and now I went home to live with my mom, but there's a local regional theater that if I knew enough about management, I could get a job as a marketing guy at this regional theater while I'm still acting or singing. Like, not knowing enough about that, and not knowing that without the money, it's the most basic thing in the world. We all walk into a store and have to buy a fucking Coke. How do you not know that the Coke guys have to make money and they're getting your money? You got to figure how they're going to buy your talent and your music.
Right.
So, sorry, but it's frustrating to me that so many young artists I speak to, and I go down to Smalls, and these guys are playing this incredible music that's mostly for each other. And this is not just Smalls. I love Smalls. Nothing against Smalls. But a lot of New York young talented musicians, it's like, this is incredible. But there isn't a plan for that next step. This isn't all with a purpose in mind, and that purpose being, I'm going to make music that's going to reach people and move them, and I'm going to get compensated for that because it's my job. It's like a lot of artists are afraid to accept the fact that it's their job. Now, you're not. You get it. You know how to balance it. Like, your career is fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
Really. It's like you're able to play, whether you're in a pit or in a recording studio or making your own recordings or doing this series, you found a way to diversify your career and use your talents in enough ways that you're able to make a living for you and your family and feel the creative impulse fulfilled and build something for yourself. All young musicians need to walk into this, and that's the advice I give you, is think about all of those factors and learn about all those factors. It's as important to understand the business you're getting into as it is to understand the 12 keys and all the modes of the scales, okay?
I that was so well said. I couldn't agree more, and I think that's the issue with these incredible conservatories, but many of them have no focus on that whatsoever. You talk about the best of them is University of Miami, for my money, and they have a whole degree in that. It's incredible, and they understand that's a big part of it. But
when I was in college there in the 80s, Alfred Reed was running the music business. We're in a revolution, and he had this whole thing, 5 cents per selection per side, and everyone would take this one music business class where you learn the basics of the business. Well, now they've got a couple of classes, and now they've got a great program where anyone who goes in there, you've got a couple of semesters in music business, at least from what I understand, what I remember. One is the nuts and bolts of the business side, and one is more entrepreneurship, which is perfect, which is great.
Yeah.
I don't think it's enough, even if that's what it is. Like, I think you should also, every week, you should have a forum. where you go in for an hour and someone from the business talks to you about the realities of what you're getting ready for. I mean,
they have a lot of that, and just seeing
Yeah.
it now, I don't know the full depth of it, but I actually think there's a degree now, but I kind of got sidetracked a little bit in the sense that, you know, that's the best of the best, and whatever their specifics are. But, you know, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, the school that I went to, big schools here in New York, you know, there's very little attention paid to exactly what you just described, and I think it's really great advice for all young musicians, not just young musicians. It's for all of us. It's constantly changing.
Well,
you know,
the thing is that it's actually really fucking interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating, you know, as we watch this business evolve. But you have to, because it's your job. But at the same time, once you get into it, it's fascinating. The advice I'll give young people about getting into this business, other than finding yourself artistically and feeling that you are leading with your heart, and also practice your balls off. Okay, it's like I'm working with Pasquale Grasso right now, who is a revolutionary guitar player. He's revolutionary, although he's not playing anything that musically couldn't have existed prior to after 1950. Like, it's all bebop. But we're doing 50 solo guitar tracks, and he's playing. It's Art Tatum. It meets Bud Powell on guitar. It's unbelievable. But to get to a place where he was doing something that no one has really ever done before on his instrument, and once people hear him, you'll know it's him in 3 notes. He practices 6 hours a day. I mean, the guitar people who make his guitar just posted this thing online about, hey, one of Pasquale's guitars is in, and he's had it for 6 years, and it's got 10 times as much wear as any instrument we've seen, and it's only one of his instruments. Like, that's how much he practices. So no matter what, practice your ass off.
You got to do the work.
You got to do the work.
Yeah.
But you also have to do the work in terms of understanding the business of what you're getting into. So very early on, it's like everyone's got to get. Again, I'm not selling Don's book, but it's the best one.
Yeah.
And it just at least start with all you need to know about the music business, and subscribe to the Daily Chord, which is South by Southwest has this daily email it sends out that's got links of the most important stories in the music business that day. And it's just the Daily Chord, and every day one of them might interest you. But at least you know that if something's happening in Washington, if someone is doing something very different in terms of how they're reaching people with their music, it's going to have an overview, a story about it. It's all a compilation of articles on all different
great
sources.
Yeah.
So it's really good to do that, because then you'll be on top of that.
Yeah.
And watch what's happening in Washington. And although, all of the extra musical things happening in politics are extremely important, and I'm about, you don't want to get me started talking about politics right now.
No.
But there are also things going on in terms of politics that relate to us. And I have been remiss in not being active in Washington with Grammys on the Hill and all that stuff. But there's legislation in place now that's the Senate hasn't signed yet. I can't. I feel horrible. I don't know exactly what happened. I know that the House signed this thing, and it's hoping to go through the Senate shortly. But read up on it like I'm about to, because I feel bad I haven't. But check that out and understand what's happening with master rights and copyright right and publishing rights and all that on all the new digital platforms, because that's all going to affect everyone very directly. And it can all mean good things. But like I said, know what the product is that you're going to end up selling and being a part of. And even if you end up being a pit musician that's all you do for a living, or if you end up being a music teacher, if you're a teacher, you better be ready to answer that question of that student that says, how am I going to make a living at this? Your responsibility is to be able to answer that question as much as anything, as much as what mouthpiece should I be playing, because you got to make a living. And that's true. If that can happen, if that balance of art and commerce happens with an artist, with the artists I've worked with where it's worked, and I've seen a record, whether it's Kenny Ayer's Pursuance record, the John Coltrane record, or the Brad stuff, or more recently Kirk Whalum's Donny Hathaway project. There are projects, Robert Randolph's recent record I produced. When I see this stuff do that, when I see the creation of something that connects, that documents that artist in a way that really captures the passion and emotion of the story they're telling. And I see it connect with an audience, and I see the look on the artist's face, and I see the look on the fan's face. It's like, that's money right there.
Yeah.
And again, it's not crass. One of the crazy things I've always thought was interesting about how people look at music and they think of this thing about a sellout. It's like, wait a minute, this example of Kenny G. Okay, we can all hate on Kenny G all we want, but the fact is that he's probably the most successful improviser we've nearly ever seen. Okay, he is an improviser. He's writing music, and when he had his most successful recordings, as much as we think it's vapid or might think that he's, got issues musically, the fact is that it was genuinely him and his personality. He led with his heart, he told his stories, and he improvised and told stories with his solos, and it reached millions and millions of people. He made money improvising jazz. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't look at him and say, I hate Kenny G. What you need to do is look at it and say, how did he do that? Mm-hmm. What is it about that ended up reaching people? And the fact is, he was who he was and he did it. I worked with Boney James, who's still a dear friend of mine. Mm-hmm. The guy, now Boney's a serious player. He can really deal. But what he's led with is his personality, his heart and his soul. And his music, within 3 notes, I know it's Boney. Now, that's more important than me saying, oh my God, you just played that, incredible Chris Potter solo backwards. I don't give a fuck. That's a guy doing that. That's not that guy.
Right.
And so,
That's a great piece of advice. Matt, this has been just awesome, man. I really appreciate all your insights and stories and the experiences that you shared with us. Just as we close out, what do you got on your dance card in terms of projects you're working on right now?
Pasquale, which what we're doing, this is summing up kind of like these 2 projects I'm working on right now, kind of like 2 of the projects I'm working on now. And this is not anything against any of the other artists I'm producing. I do a lot of different stuff, but 2 things I'm doing for Sony, actually. One is Pasquale, who, if you haven't heard Pasquale Grasso yet, you're going to. The vision I have for it and what we're doing is we're recording 50 tracks.
Right.
And we're going to release them in sets of 5 on the digital platforms. And it's all solo guitar. It's like 5 standards, 5 ballads, 5 Monk, 5 Bud Powell, Bird, Ellington, holiday songs. So we're going to release them, and then the label will work on getting tracks on playlists and working it in that way. So it's a lot of content. And then eventually we'll put out like an album that will be a combination of a lot of the stuff from them. But the point of it was, to me, is this is guys doing, flooding the market with it or putting it out in sets of 5 is what I think that I want people. It's the kind of thing that I think is addictive. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that you can do it. I mean, it's not like it's going to hurt. Right. Too much music, wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm doing. I'm really excited about, and that over the period of time that'll come out, and then we'll start doing duo and trio and other stuff with him. But he's a revolutionary player, and trying to find a revolutionary way to expose him to people. And again, everything I do, I want to find a way that I'm doing. I'm producer, but I have to make product that can be sold in today's market without compromise. So that's what the whole discussion always is with any artist I work with. So that's what I'm doing. The other thing I'm doing is a project that the name is in the works right now, but the working title is the group is called New Masters, and the series is called Reworks. And it's for Masterworks. Mm. And the idea is it's cover songs. And it's the most, I'm talking Cardi B, Drake, Migos, you name it. Like the stuff that is getting tens of billions of, like stuff that's streaming more than anything else. But the most biggest pop hits. And I'm putting together a group that, it's not that it's no name, but it's going to be a series of recordings that are with different players. So the brand name is New Masters, but I'm going to put together the band based on the music. So the first one is just big pop, R&B, hip-hop kind of hits. And so I put together an all-star jazz band of names I can't talk about yet, but it's big names, serious players that play together. And we're going to go in for one day and cut 6 songs. And it's going to be fun cover versions of the most blatantly commercial songs that exist in music today.
Great.
But I'm picking ones that actually have some kind of melody. And also taking the artistic challenge of saying, okay, this is like a hip hop tune. Like this is, Kendrick. And it's not a melody, it's him rapping this thing. What instrument could actually play that like it's a real melody? And how cool could that be? So taking it as an artistic challenge of that. But anyway, it's going to be a cover series that we'll put out, again, like 6 tracks, digital only, getting songs placed on playlists, and build it over time and eventually do more of them, maybe put out a compilation album of some sort, but leading with the music and the tracks. Because, as I said, I mean, putting out an album these days, who's buying an album and who needs an album?
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like you make these CDs and who's buying them? I mean, at gigs, people say, oh, but I sell them at my gigs. Blindly not realizing that, wait a minute, no, people are buying that because it's the only thing you're selling.
Right.
Yeah,
that's true.
I mean, and they're not listening to it. You're autographing it. They take it home, and usually they're going to listen to your record on Spotify. If you sold them something else, you could autograph a tour book, some sheet music, any number of things. They're going to buy it. You're selling music as merch. So the actual release of the music is finding ways to put out tracks and EPs and different flow of product that's really driven by what can the market bear, but also how can the artist realize their vision without the restrictions of the album cycle. So that's a little babbly about it, but those are the couple of things I'm working on, excited about right now. But some other stuff's really really exciting. So I'm just keeping busy and trying to make a living in a dying business. I mean, one thing that's important is that I'm trying. Like I said, I've kept one foot in each world. I'm really grateful to have this consultancy with Sony Masterworks, because it's a great company, but it's not a jazz company. Like there's a jazz element to what's going on in there, but it's a staff of 20 people that are working, Broadway recordings, Yo-Yo Ma and Joshua Bell, soundtracks, a new, alternative singer-songwriter, Americana kind of artists, and jazz, and a whole lot of different stuff. So the people working the records aren't just thinking of what kind of music. So I kind of like that. It's what I loved about, when I moved from Blue Note to Warner Brothers. And Mo said to me, do you want an imprint? Do you want a Warner Jazz label? And I go, no, man, I want my artists to come out on the same label that Madonna and R.E.M. are on. Because I don't want people to think that it's a certain kind of label. I want people to feel that it's music that's beyond category. Yeah, so
that's a good way to look at it.
So,
Matt, thank you for your time
pleasure.
today. This was such a pleasure.
Sorry if I've babbled on too much.
No, seriously, most of all, thank you for all the incredible work that you've done and the impact that you've made on the music and us as fans and listeners and musicians. You've made a tremendous impact, and it's always appreciated. And can't wait to hear your next Matt Pierson project.
Well, thank you so much. That's very nice to hear, but appreciate it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. We will see all of you next time on Bone2Pick.